in Pittsburgh. Eva, what was Kamala Harris's message to Pennsylvania voters?
Well, Wolf, she called for greater investments in manufacturing for new technologies that would impact communities like the ones right here in Pittsburgh. She also called for more investments for aerospace and artificial intelligence that would have an impact on the state's factory towns. But ultimately, she was trying to make a cultural argument here, Wolf, that when it comes to the struggles of everyday Americans, that the former president just doesn't get it. It yielded the loudest applause here among invited guests at Carnegie Mellon University. Let's listen.
You see, for Donald Trump, our economy works best if it works for those who own the big skyscrapers, not those who actually build them, not those who wire them, not those who mop the floors.
And Wolf, it didn't end there. She said that the former president, that when it comes to him, he's among the biggest losers on manufacturing. She also said that unlike him, she would not sell out America to our competitors or our adversaries. Now, the billionaire businessman Mark Cuban, he was in the crowd and he spoke to reporters after the event. And he was asked why the vice president continues to trail the president when voters are asked about this issue of the economy. Why is there still this 10-point gap? And he simply stated that she essentially needs more time, that she's still a relatively new candidate for president, and that her message is still getting out there. But he's confident that once Americans hear about her economic vision, that they will support her. Wolf.
All right, Eva, I want you to stand by as we bring in CNN's Elena Treen. She's covering Donald Trump's pitch to North Carolina voters. Elena, Trump also delivered an economic policy speech, but he had very strong words about several other topics.
I know that's exactly right, Wolf. Donald Trump, this speech today in North Carolina was billed as an economic speech, which he did talk about the economy at length. But it was very clear during his remarks that he also had an eye on the foreign leaders who are currently in the United States for the UN General Assembly. Now, at one point, he was discussing the two assassination attempts on his life, and then he started to sharply criticize Iran. And at one point, he even claimed that if he were president and if any foreign country, whether it be Iran or another country, tried to threaten a leading U.S. candidate running for a presidential election, that he would blow that country to smithereens. Take a listen.
If I were the president, I would inform the threatening country, in this case Iran, that if you do anything to harm this person, we are going to blow your largest cities and the country itself to smithereens.
Now, Wolf, this comes just a day after Donald Trump says that he was briefed by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Iran's potential plot to try and assassinate him. It also comes, as we heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken earlier today, saying that the Biden administration is intensely tracking any type of threat from Iran on former and current U.S. officials. But look, Iran and Iranian leaders were not the only topic, or foreign leaders, I should say, that Donald Trump brought up here in North Carolina. He also started to sharply criticize President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine during his speech today as well. And really, it was some of the most public criticisms we have heard of from Donald Trump of Zelensky thus far. And also his comments really indicated that he would significantly pare back support to Ukraine and funding for the war between Ukraine and Russia if he were elected in November. He said at one point that those cities are gone. Speaking about Ukraine, they're gone, and we continue to give billions of dollars to a man who refused to make a deal, Zelensky. So some very harsh words there as well from the foreign president about Ukraine.
Very interesting. All right, Elena Treen and Eva McKen, to both of you, thank you very much. Let's get some more on the presidential race. Our political experts are with us. And Jasmine Wright, I'll start with you. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, just sat down for her first national one-on-one interview as the Democratic nominee. Here's a clip from that. Watch this.
Tariffs aren't unique to President Trump. President Biden has tariffs in place. He's actually looking to potentially implement more. Where do you come out on? Is there a good tariff, a bad tariff?
Well, part of it is you don't just throw around the idea of just tariffs across the board, and that's part of the problem with Donald Trump. Frankly, I'm going to, and I say this in all sincerity, he's just not very serious about how he thinks about some of these issues. And one must be serious and have a plan, and a real plan that's not just about some talking point ending in an exclamation at a political rally, but actually putting the thought into what will be the return on the investment and what will be the economic impact on everyday people.
So, Jasmine, what stood out to you from that answer?
Well, I think it's really interesting, Wolf, because reporters were hoping to hear more from the vice president on tariffs. It was something that was previewed that she would talk about, and she didn't actually really get to it in her speech in Pennsylvania. But I think here we have a wholesale answer from her, really trying to narrow in on the contrast between the former president and herself, trying to cast him as somebody on a litany of issues. But of course, right now we're talking about tariffs. The vice president has cast Trump's ideas of tariffs, basically pulling in all of these other people who say that they wouldn't work, casting it as unserious, basically saying it's a tax on Americans. And so she's been pretty public about her views on Trump's ideas of tariffs. I think one thing we should note is that she didn't actually answer what would be a good tariff and what would be a bad tariff. Kind of getting back to that idea, Wolf, that Americans aren't necessarily hearing the type of specificity from her that they would want to. Of course, I know people have said it's a double standard because you're not exactly hearing any type of specificity from the former president. But I think that that's one thing that people will ask her time and time again is what is a good tariff, what is a bad tariff. But wholesale, what we heard from the vice president today was her really leaning in on this more middle of the road moderation when it comes to the economy. She said she wasn't. She was a pragmatism. She said she wouldn't be moved by ideology when it comes to the economy. And I think that that answer feeds back into that, trying to show that she is going to be more middle of the road on the economy, but also casting Trump as an unserious person.
Brian Lanza is with us as well. Brian Lanza, senior advisor to the Trump campaign. Brian, Trump, as we all know, is a big fan of tariffs. He claims they can pay for tax breaks, lower prices, and even help the cost of childcare. So how do you respond to Kamala Harris's claim that Trump isn't being serious with these proposals?
You know, first of all, Wolf, thank you for having me. You know, how I respond to Kamala Harris, and it's how we respond to the American people. Look at President Trump's economic records when he was president. It's pretty clear that tariffs worked with some respect as he targeted China and brought them to the negotiating table. But if you look at the everyday pocketbook of Americans during the Trump term, they experienced tremendous amount of wage growth. They didn't have the inflation that's wiping out their savings. They're not having to cash in their retirement to make ends meet. And so what people heard from, Stephanie Ruhl's interview and from people heard earlier today or from the economic speech is it's a lack of specifics because she can't get to the details that offer a real plan forward because she has to acknowledge the failures of the last 4 years, and those failures lie squarely on Harris-Biden. They're the ones who've wiped out the American middle class with high tariffs. Kamala Harris is the one who's talking about price controls for housing or for food and stuff like that. Price controls fails, and the best place we know price controls fails is in New York City and in San Francisco, liberal San Francisco, where price controls.
But Brian, even some of Trump's Republican supporters, big shots, are panning his tariff proposals. Listen and watch this.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of tariffs. They raise the prices for American consumers. I'm more of a free trade kind of Republican that remembers how many jobs are created by the exports that we engage in. So I'm not a tariff fan.
So is Mitch McConnell wrong? What do you think?
Well, yes. I mean, look at the record. Look at President Trump's record when he was president. His economic record. Tariffs worked when he was looking to achieve his policy goals. People had more money in their pockets. So yes, there's an old establishment that sort of wants this fair trade that benefits the few. But the reality is tariffs have benefited the vast majority of Americans during Trump's presidential term. And at least President Trump knows what a tariff is and will provide an answer, which you won't get from Kamala Harris.
All right, Ashley, let me get your thoughts. Is Harris doing enough to paint the picture for Americans that tariffs will actually raise the cost of goods that are imported into the United States?
I mean, what I love about Brian is like Trump is always right, everybody else is wrong. I mean, it's this convenient amnesia that Republicans have. You know, Donald Trump oversaw the worst economy in modern history. 2 million women dropped out of the workforce under his watch. You know, the failure on COVID is what triggered the spike in inflation. He added $8 trillion to the deficit. So this convenient amnesia around the economy is really deceptive to the American people. And I think we need to infuse some truth here and some facts here. And I think that's what the vice president really needs to lean into. She needs to also remind people that your life was not better under Donald Trump. He might talk about the first 3 years, but let's talk about the last year, which was an explosion of his complete and total failure. And when we talk about tariffs, Mitch McConnell's absolutely right. It costs billions of dollars to the average American. In fact, it triggered these tariff wars where, other companies were charging us more for goods. I mean, it was completely irresponsible and hit the pocketbooks of the American people. But I will say one thing, if you don't mind, Wolf, a little critical of the vice president. I felt like there was absolutely nothing novel about what happened today. I mean, to give an economic speech at an economic club in Pittsburgh, I mean, there's nothing about that feels fresh, new. It's not even consistent with what I even know about her. I worked for as her communications director. So my point is to her and her team, you've got 40 days. The only way you can beat Donald Trump is you've got to take greater risk.
This with Robin Farzad, business journalist and host of NPR's Full Disclosure. Hi, Robin. Thanks for doing this. We appreciate it. Kamala Harris has given several speeches on the economy. The polls show she still lags behind Donald Trump on this issue. What do you think is contributing to that? And what more can she put on the bone today, so to speak, in terms of specifics to kind of get those numbers moving in the right direction for her?
I mean, Brianna and John and your correspondents, they all hit it. It's really capital I inflation, as I say, the likes of which hasn't really visited this country in more than 40 years. And it is brutally hard to distance yourself from that, even though there were so many things that went into it. A once in 100-year pandemic, supply chain shocks, greedflation. They're going to put that at the feet of the White House and the incumbent administration. As you know, she's trying to present herself as a change candidate. And so there are only so many levers you can pull. It's not like, in Venezuela under Hugo Chavez, there was a call-in show where if you couldn't afford cement, he would instruct people to ship you, several bags of cement. It doesn't work that way. We have a gigantic economy. We have a globalized economy and a Federal Reserve. And she's trying to throw out red meat in the hopes of getting some swing voters to tip the election her way.
I mean, we did just see, Robin, the Fed make a big interest rate cut. And from what I am reading, it sounds as though a lot of people out there are going back into the mortgage market, trying to get mortgages, refinance. Which candidate stands to benefit most from that?
In theory, the incumbent. That's why you've historically seen the Fed not want to cut so close to an election. I mean, we had intervening scenarios in 2008. You remember we were in the throes of a financial crisis. George W. Bush was very unpopular, and that helped Barack Obama. But then he owned the financial crisis going into the first 100 days of 2009. Yes, that's a headwind that you really want. That this really does help you. But it's so far been cold comfort for those on the sidelines who cannot possibly afford a home. Even if you take a point off the prevailing mortgage market rate, there's still so many Americans with a 3% mortgage out there and appreciated homes that are in no mood to give that up to younger buyers.
And, and speaking of interest rates, Trump this afternoon said if he's reelected, he's going to put a temporary cap of 10% on credit card interest rates. Can he do that?
No, the financial services industry, the Wall Street lobby. I mean, this isn't, the Middle East or other places where you could actually cap, usury. You could have the consumer protection financial people, but the interest rates are set by the market. And you can't dictate how banks lend to other people and banks lend to each other. Those are led by economic forces and hardwired to the main interest rate that the Federal Reserve controls. So it makes for great rhetoric and red meat and saying that I will force these jobs or force these interest rates to come back. But in practice, it doesn't happen.
All right, Robin Farzad, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
We have another clip from the first Kamala Harris interview since she became the Democratic presidential nominee. Listen to what she's saying about how she would pay for some of her economic proposals. Listen to this.
We're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share. I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share. And it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax than the richest people in our country.
Let's discuss with a high-profile Kamala Harris supporter, the Democratic governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. Governor, thanks so much for joining us. The economy, as you know, is showing signs of moving in a positive direction. So why is now the right time to raise corporate taxes?
Well, it's important to recognize the difference between these two plans, right? That Kamala Harris wants to put $6,000 in the hands of young families so they can raise their children. She wants to make sure that there's $25,000 available for people to put a down payment on a new home, $50,000 for people who want to start a new business. These are all great things for American families. Donald Trump wants tariffs on people. And I want to remind you that it was tariffs that drove our economy back in the 1930s into the Great Depression. So this is the difference between the two of these candidates. Kamala Harris is just saying that, you know, if you're going to put programs forward, you got to make sure to pay for it. And the people who can most afford to pay for it are the wealthiest people in the country and the wealthiest corporations.
So you support raising corporate taxes?
Well, I think it's the right thing to do when you need to pay the bills, that you don't want to put the burden on average American families, working class people, the working families of America already overly burdened. And she's trying to lower the costs for them, put some money in their pockets, and make sure that the people who can most afford it are paying for it.
In our CNN poll, Governor, 50% of voters say Trump would do a better job managing the economy compared to just 39% for Kamala Harris. So why aren't voters buying Kamala Harris's economic message, at least not so far?
Look, she only became a candidate back, about 10 weeks ago. So it's been, a slow, steady manner of progress for her over the last 10 weeks to get that message out and make sure that people know that she's fighting for families that are struggling sometimes, right? Inflation's been hard on people, and she's the one who's trying to lower costs and put money in people's pockets.
But she's been, vice president for almost 4 years, right?
Yes, but remember, vice presidents serve at the pleasure of the president. She's been, absolutely behind President Biden's plan, but she also is somebody who has her own ideas, and she's putting those forward so that people know she's a candidate all on her own who brings strength and ideas, and a strong economy is something that she believes in. But remember that it's taken a lot to get the economy out of the challenges that were brought on by COVID. And remember that when Donald Trump left his post in 2020, right, he had left us with a couple of million fewer jobs than when he came into office. And it's been the Biden-Harris administration that brought back 16 million jobs. And now Kamala Harris is putting forward her plan for how to grow the economy, put people to work. I really think she's got the better idea. And she's not, babbling things about tariffs that, frankly, are going to take $4,000 out of every American's pockets. And something that people can't afford, they've been fighting against for some time now. And now Donald Trump, whose economists are now saying that his plan would drive us further in debt and make sure that we've got inflation that people just can't afford anymore. So we've finally got it tamed. Donald Trump wants to bring inflation back.
It's interesting, Governor, that in our new CNN poll of younger voters, Kamala Harris leads Trump 52% to 40% among likely voters younger than 35, but falls short of Biden's 2020 margin. Why aren't younger voters responding to her the same way they did in 2020?
Well, again, she's been on the campaign trail now as a candidate on her own for 10 weeks. So I think it's been important for her to get the message out. But you've seen those numbers steadily rising, and she's doing very well in the national polls as well as in the battleground states. So I feel pretty good about where she stands, and I think she's going to do even better among younger voters as they start to recognize that she's the one standing up for their freedom, for their futures, right? For the opportunity for them to get a job, to buy a house, to have a family. She's the one putting together a program that will help them. And Donald Trump has nothing to offer except taking away a woman's right to choose and shutting down people's individual freedoms.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, thanks as usual for joining us.
Don't trust Trump. Those are the words from Kamala Harris, sending that message moments ago to voters who say in poll after poll that they believe that Trump would be better in the economy than she would be.
Top economists in our country, from Nobel laureates to people at Moody's and Goldman Sachs, have compared my plan with his and said my plan would grow the economy, his would shrink the economy. Some of them have actually assessed that his plan would increase inflation and invite a recession by the middle of next year. So the facts remain that Donald Trump has a history of taking care of very rich people. My perspective on the economy is when you grow the middle class, America's economy is stronger. And there's empirical evidence to prove my point correct.
All right, everyone's back with me. So, Megan, now we're here together. So, obviously, the economy's been one of the strongest areas for Trump, immigration and the economy. But the question is, does it make sense for her? I mean, is this the way to address it? And I mean, she's talking in big terms and obviously more specific ones as well, but talking about, inflation and a recession. Is that going to convince people?
Look, I think she should be doing more local medias and hitting people in their areas and where they are watching at their nightly news, when they're cooking dinner for their families, on issues that are going to impact them directly in their homes and in their regions.
So very specific to a local market, specific plant, specific thing.
And talking about what is impacting them. The things that are impacting Wisconsin are probably different than what's impacting North Carolina. Gas prices are coming down, grocery prices are coming down across the country. But people in Wisconsin and North Carolina and these battleground states might not be feeling that. And so I do think doing more of a local media strategy is probably better. Then we're not all sitting here talking about the one interview that she's done in the past couple of weeks. We would be talking about interviews that she's doing every single day out on the trail, which I do think would reach voters more, and I do think it would help her in the economy.
And perhaps be more personal. I mean, Scott, here is more of what Harris is trying to lean into in this national interview. And I would talk more about the fact that it's national in a moment. But first, here's what she's saying.
We have ambition. We have aspirations. We have dreams. We can see what's possible. We have an incredible work ethic. But not everyone has the access to the opportunities that allow them to achieve those things. But we don't lack for those things. But not everyone, gets handed stuff on a silver platter. And so my vision for the economy, I call it an opportunity economy, is about making sure that all Americans, wherever they start, wherever they are, have the ability to actually achieve those dreams and those ambitions.
In that specific moment, Scott, she doesn't, of course, tie silver platter specifically and explicitly to Trump, but it's a phrase she's used to attack him after the debate. It's clearly the implication she's trying to make. Does that breakthrough, does talk like this have some people say, okay, maybe I should reconsider, who are in that group that trust him on the economy more?
Yeah, I'm still confused about which billionaire rich people are good and which are bad. Trump is, I guess, bad. The people who support Trump are bad. The billionaires that she goes around with, I guess, are good. I think it's a very muddled thing, and I still don't understand. I think today was a miss for Harris. I mean, Joe Biden went on The View today and said he delegated all sorts of authority to her on domestic policy. We know that the Biden administration is not popular on domestic and economic policy. She gave a speech today saying we've got to move past the policies that people think have failed. Well, people think the last 4 years are a failure. And from what I can tell from this interview tonight, which was really a home game, I mean, going on with this particular interviewer was like effectively interviewing with her campaign's press secretary. She had nothing new to say on the economy beyond this ridiculous pablum. You want to talk about aspirations and dreams? They're crushed in this country because of inflation, and these kinds of interviews and the day that she had today are not going to solve it.
So, Jane, can I just ask you about where this happened, right? To Megan's point, which is she could be doing local news. She has done some local interviews, right? But she did the joint interview with Tim Moore.
Local news.
Right. She did a CNN interview, but nationally since then she hasn't. And now she's doing MSNBC, which is friendly turf, right? I'm not going to be pejorative about it. It's MSNBC. That's their brand. Is that the audience she needs to be talking to, Jane? I mean, it would appear to me that that core base of that audience is already voting for her. So if she's trying to win people over, what is she doing?
I think that, she's doing a ton of earned media, and she's doing a ton of interviews. She did local Pennsylvania news just a couple of weeks ago. But look, Trump goes on Fox News and they tell him how great he is, and he says how much he likes Fox News. That's been going on for 9 years now. So I think that it's important to do big national media. I want her to be doing media every single day, but I get her emails from my inbox. She is doing national media. She's doing local media. She's talking to people. She's going on podcasts. She's doing conversations. She's having town halls. I think that there's a town hall in a couple of weeks with Telemundo. I think that the work that she's been doing, it's one of the hardest things about being in media is that I'm aware that I will say, I want you to do more media. And then I will be she will do more media, and then she will get criticized for doing more media. But I think it's just so important to remember that we are not the audience here. The audience are the actual undecided voters who haven't really thought about this election very much, and they have their own concerns.
Okay.
And so I think it's really important to just keep doing it.
I am curious, though, to that point, and I think highly of the interviewer herself, but to that point, Megyn, why do MSNBC? Because the viewers of MSNBC, they're not the undecided voter, right? And her base is already very energized and turning out for her. I know you can't ever give up on that if you're a candidate, but where should she be going to reach out to undecided, unaffiliated voters?
Well, we're all talking about it. So whether she does MSNBC or CNN, we're all sitting here talking about it. So it's still getting covered.
Fair.
So it still is getting in broad strokes. She's still getting a lot of coverage from any interview that she does. She could go to Bloomberg. She could go to CNBC to do an econ interview. But I do think
I'd love to have her right here to do an econ interview.
But I do think Stephanie Ruhle does have a reputation for being a person who's very knowledgeable on the economy, and it is a good interview person for her to do, and it is getting covered. So I do think it's a smart thing to do. I also agree that she should be doing more podcasts and more, social media things with influencers and meeting people where they are. A lot of youth voters are on TikTok, and that's where they get their news. So yes, she should be meeting those people where they are as well. But I don't think it really matters what network she's on, because we're all covering it.
Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, giving remarks on her economic plan in Pittsburgh, saying that pragmatism will be her guiding economic principle while focusing on growing the middle class. It's obviously a timely subject. The top concern that poll after poll says for the American people is the economy. It's the focus today for both Harris and her Republican rival, former President Donald Trump, as they both take their economic messages to voters in two crucial battleground states. You saw Harris there in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Mr. Trump is in the state of North Carolina. Earlier today, former President Trump held a campaign event in Mint Hill in North Carolina. It's a swing county outside Charlotte. There, he went after his opponent.
Kamala Harris is a one-woman economic wrecking ball. And this November, the people of North Carolina are going to tell her we've had enough.
Trump also took credit for saving North Carolina's furniture industry while he was president.
And I stood up to China like never before, including by imposing a 22% tariff on all Chinese furniture imports, saving the North Carolina furniture industry, what was left of it.
Harris, of course, taking on Donald Trump's economic record and his policies as well. With just 41 days left until the election, Vice President Harris is going to do her first solo network interview of the campaign tonight. Let's bring in our political panel of experts and talk about what we've just heard from the candidates. Here's a little bit more of what Vice President Harris said in her speech just now, contrasting her economic policies with that of her Republican rival. Take a listen.
I intend to chart a new way forward and grow America's middle class. Donald Trump intends to take America backward to the failed policies of the past. He has no intention to grow our middle class. He's only interested in making life better for himself and people like himself, the wealthiest of Americans.
Ron Brownstein, let me bring you in. You have Harris here saying, quote, I am a capitalist, talking about proposals, specific ones for first-time homeowners, for young families, for small businesses. Obviously, she trails with polls in terms of the public being asked who they trust more in the economy. What do you think?
Well, she's not likely to completely eliminate that gap because it's based on the perception among voters that cost of living was more affordable under Trump than it has been under Biden. But she is narrowing that gap. And what this speech did, I think, was really kind of lay out the depth of the divergence here. I mean, Trump is offering, in essence, a Fortress America economic strategy of unprecedented tariffs that we haven't seen since before the Depression, massive deportation and immigration restrictions, and low taxes. That was essentially the Republican agenda of the 1920s before the Depression. Harris, I think, as you saw in the speech, linked herself to Lincoln and Eisenhower, the Transcontinental Railroad, Interstate Highway System, partnership between government and industry to a greater extent than we've seen really for most of the last 50 years, although Biden has moved in this direction, to nurture industries of the future and to steer it towards specific places. That place-based economic strategy, very significant as well. So the divergence between the two of them and the kind of economic future they are offering and the role of government, the role of U.S. interaction with the rest of the world, it could not be more profound. And I think this speech went a long way toward giving people a better sense of how big that difference is.
And Alencia, one of the things that Vice President Harris said is that for Donald Trump, the economy works best if it works for those who own big skyscrapers, not the people who build them, not the people who wire them, trying to paint him as a friend of the plutocrats.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality of it. Like, his tax policies benefit corporations, the wealthy, and not the middle class. I mean, she said over and over that if you make anywhere between under $400,000, your taxes will not increase, which that is majority of Americans. And to this point Ron is making, her policies are about growing the middle class. It's about making sure that Americans have the jobs and opportunities and the home ownership and the resources that they need to define opportunity for themselves that works for them economically. I also loved in the speech that she talked about how, independent economists were looking at the two policies, and majority of them say that her policy is the one that will work for the American people. The trickle-down economics of cutting taxes for the billionaires and businesses doesn't work. And so she is laying this out, and I think the American people over the last presidential cycles have been paying attention to those differences.
Mark?
Well, I mean, I think she failed to do what the American people want to hear from her. She has no policy to cut grocery prices other than to blame price gouging and install government price controls. She's talking about government handouts for housing as opposed to bringing down mortgage. It's a handout to cover the fact that because mortgage rates are off the charts because of their sky-high inflation. They're not bringing down gas prices. People knew that they had more money in their pockets, things were more affordable, gas, groceries, everything was better off when Donald Trump was in office, and government price controls and more high tax increases for big business is not going to create jobs and grow the economy.
Sure. She obviously, like her career in California, and you're from her hometown newspaper, was focused much more. She was a district attorney, then an attorney general, then a senator, and only for a few years before she became vice president. She really hasn't been focused on the economy in her career. She's been focused on law and justice issues.
That's absolutely correct, Jake. But I think the point that I would make, and she would probably make, is that she has taken on some economic issues in her work as Attorney General. I think price gouging sort of speaks to that, although the problem that we're encountering with all of these is we're getting a vision of her economic agenda, of her policy agenda. We're not getting specifics, which may be a gamble that works. I'm working on a story right now for the Chronicle about the specific things that would actually, voters don't want to hear specifics. They just want to hear the vision. They want to understand that the person who is running for office understands them and is speaking to those issues. And so while it may frustrate people here in Washington, it may actually work on the ground with swing voters.
Can I just ask really quickly? I just want to know, what are the specifics that people want? She's giving these numbers. She's talking about the ways that she's going to have this public-private partnership. She's talking about ways to work with Congress, talking about ways that she can work as the president. So I keep hearing this question, specifics. She keeps giving specifics because the American people know these numbers.
Stick around.